The letter was nailed to the front door with a rusty tack. Jack Turner stood on the porch, staring at it like it might disappear if he waited long enough. The wind off the planes rattled the loose boards under his boots. Inside the house, his little sister was humming to herself, lining up her crayons on the kitchen table like it was any other morning. He was 15, old enough to read the words, old enough to understand them. Notice of seizure. The bank wanted the house, the land, everything their parents had left behind. Jack pulled the paper free and folded it into his jacket pocket before Rosie could see it. Rosie was 8, all sharp elbows and bright eyes, with hair that never stayed tied back and questions that never stayed quiet. "Who was that for?" she asked, peeking around the doorframe. "Nobody," Jack said too fast. "Just junk mail." She didn't believe him, but she didn't push. Rosie had learned when to be silent, the way kids do when life teaches them early. Their mom had died the winter before. Pneumonia. 3 weeks from cough to coffin. Their dad had been gone even longer, laid off from the rail line, then gone for good not long after. No grandparents nearby, no aunts or uncles who answered letters, just a farmhouse leaning into the wind and 2 kids pretending it was still a family. Jack tried everything. He chopped firewood for neighbors, hauled hay, cleaned stalls, sold his father's old tools one by one, even the pocket knife with the cracked handle. Still, the numbers didn't move. The debt stayed the same. The cold kept coming. That afternoon, a county truck rolled past without stopping. Jack watched it from the back field, his jaw tight, his fists clenched inside his coat sleeves. He knew what came next. If they were found still living there after the deadline, the county would step in. Foster homes, paperwork, different towns, different beds, different lives. That night, Rosie sat on the edge of the mattress they shared and whispered, "Are they going to make us leave?" Jack looked at the ceiling, where a brown water stain spread like a slow bruise. "Not if I can help it." She turned on her side, hugging her stuffed rabbit. "I don't want to go where they don't know you." The words landed heavy in his chest. After she fell asleep, Jack went outside with a flashlight and walked past the barn, past the frozen pump, to the old concrete hatch half buried behind a row of weeds. Their dad had dug it years ago, chasing groundwater that never came. A failed well, a forgotten hole in the earth. Jack lifted the warped wooden cover and shined the light down. Dark, deep, silent. The air rising from it smelled like damp stone and rust. He imagined the house empty, the door swinging loose, their names erased. Then he imagined Rosie somewhere else, crying in a strange bed, his stomach twisted. Slowly, a thought took shape, reckless, desperate, and impossible to unsee. If the house was taken, they wouldn't need the house. They would need a place no one was looking for. Jack lowered himself onto the ladder rung by rung, the cold biting through his gloves. When his boots touched solid ground, he stood in the narrow space and listened to his own breathing echo against the dirt walls. For the first time since the letter arrived, something inside him steadied. "We'll stay," he whispered to the dark. "We'll just stay somewhere else." Above him, the wind kept howling over land that no longer belonged to them. Jack didn't tell Rosie right away. For 3 days, he worked alone. After school hours, what was left of them, he walked out past the barn and lifted the warped wooden lid of the old well. He climbed down with a rope and flashlight, testing each rung like his life depended on it. The space below was narrow and damp, the walls rough with old concrete and dirt. It wasn't a room yet. It was just a hole that smelled like cold earth and forgotten time. But Jack had grown up watching his dad fix broken things. Fences, engines, leaky pipes. He knew how to measure twice and cut once. He knew how to make something out of nothing if he had to. He scavenged wood from the collapsed chicken coop, old boards from the shed, a rusted stove door from the dump outside town. Every trip, he carried something down, one piece at a time, hidden under his coat or wrapped in a tarp. At night, when Rosie slept, he worked by flashlight. He built a small platform first, lifting it off the dirt so water wouldn't pool under them. Then he nailed up boards along the walls to keep loose soil from crumbling down. His hands blistered, his shoulders burned. But when he stood back and looked at the space, it no longer felt like a grave. It felt like a beginning. On the 4th night, he finally told Rosie, "We're going to play a hiding game," he said, trying to sound casual. Rosie sat cross-legged on the mattress, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. "Like hide and seek?" "Yeah, but longer and quieter." She tilted her head. "From who?" "From trouble," he said. "Just for the winter." She studied his face the way kids do when they know the truth is hiding behind words. Will it be dark? A little. Cold? Not as cold as outside. Rosie nodded slowly. Okay, as long as you're there. The next days were a blur of work and pretending. Jack made it look like they'd left. He packed boxes, shut the curtains, let dust gather. He carried their food down at night. Canned beans, flour, dried apples, peanut butter. He found a small camp stove at the junkyard and dragged it home on a sled. Inside the hole, he made a corner just for Rosie. A narrow bed frame with blankets folded thick. A shelf for her crayons and books. A hook for her jacket. Rosie started calling it the burrow. It's like for animals, she said. But we're people. People can burrow too, Jack said. The hardest part was the smoke. Jack punched a thin hole through the concrete and fitted an old metal pipe through it, angling it so the smoke wouldn't rise straight up. He packed dirt and clay around it until no light showed through. When he lit the stove for the first time, smoke curled along the ceiling, then drifted out the pipe. Rosie clapped softly like it was magic. By the end of the week, the house above was empty. The door hung crooked. The windows were dark. The fields lay quiet. Below in the hidden space under the ground, Jack and Rosie sat side by side on the narrow bed, listening to the wind scrape across the surface of the world they used to live in. Jack told himself this was temporary, just long enough to get through winter, just long enough to keep them together. But as Rosie leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, "It feels safe down here," Jack felt something tighten in his chest. Because he knew one thing for sure now. If this place failed, there would be no second chance. Winter came down hard and fast. The first real snow buried the road overnight. From their hidden space underground, Jack and Rosie could hear the wind screaming across the fields, rattling the loose tin on the barn and driving ice against the empty house above them. The world they used to know sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. Down in the burrow, time worked differently. Jack kept track of days by marking lines on a scrap of cardboard. Rosie learned to tell morning from night by the way the cold crept through the dirt walls. They lived in layers, 2 sweaters, a coat, and blankets that never seemed thick enough. Food became math. 1 spoon of peanut butter for Rosie, half a can of beans for Jack. Bread made from flour and water, cooked flat on the stove until it tasted like cardboard. Jack always told Rosie he wasn't hungry. Rosie always believed him. Water was worse. Every third night, Jack climbed out after dark and walked to the creek with 2 jugs, moving low and slow like he was sneaking through enemy land. He hated leaving Rosie alone in the hole, but he hated the thought of her being thirsty even more. "Don't light the stove while I'm gone," he said every time. "I won't," Rosie promised. Some days she forgot what the sky looked like. "Is it blue today?" she asked once. Jack swallowed. "Yeah, real blue." They made rules to stay sane. Mornings were for school. Rosie traced letters on a notebook Jack had stolen from the classroom trash. Afternoons were for quiet games, stacking rocks, lining up bottle caps, whispering stories about animals that lived under the snow. Nights were for soup and sleep. But winter didn't care about rules. One evening, while Jack was heating water, the stove started coughing instead of drawing. Smoke slid back into the room like a dark animal, filling the air with a sharp, burning taste. Rosie started coughing. "Jack, it hurts." His chest went tight. He shoved the stove door closed, grabbed Rosie, and pressed her face into his coat. His eyes burned. His head spun. The pipe was blocked. Ice had formed somewhere above them. Jack grabbed the rope and climbed. The ladder was slick with frost. His fingers went numb before he reached the top. When he pushed the hatch open, snow blew straight into his face. The pipe was crusted over with ice thick as glass. He chipped at it with a rock, hands shaking, teeth chattering. The wind howled like it wanted him gone. Down below, Rosie was alone in the dark. When the ice finally broke, smoke rushed upward like it had been waiting. Jack dropped back into the hole, gasping. Rosie clung to him, crying into his jacket. "I thought you left me," she said. "Never," he whispered, even though the words scared him. After that, Jack checked the pipe every night. No excuses, no waiting. Still, the days wore them down. Rosie grew quieter. She played less. She stared at the wall like she was listening to something far away. Jack felt the walls closing in, not with dirt, but with silence. One night, Rosie asked, "Do people still live up there?" Jack hesitated. "Yeah, they just don't know we're here." She nodded slowly. "Then we're like a secret." Jack forced a smile. But inside, a thought kept repeating. Secrets could keep you safe, or they could bury you alive. It started with a cough, dry and small at first, the kind Rosie tried to hide in her sleeve. Jack noticed anyway. He noticed everything now. The way her shoulders sagged, the way she didn't line up her crayons anymore, the way her voice sounded thin when she asked for water. By the second night, her skin burned under his hand. Jack pressed his palm to her forehead and felt panic rise like a wave. They had no medicine, no phone, no one to call, just the dim lantern and the steady drip of water from the dirt ceiling. "You're just cold," he said, though he didn't believe it. "I'll make soup." She tried to smile. "Okay." He boiled water longer than usual, added the last of the dried vegetables, and crushed half a cracker into the pot to make it thicker. Rosie took 3 spoonfuls and pushed it away. "My head feels loud," she whispered. Jack wrapped her in both blankets and sat with her on the narrow bed, rocking back and forth the way their mom used to do when storms knocked out the power. He told Rosie stories about summer, about fishing in the creek, about the time she chased a chicken and fell into the mud, about how the sky turned orange before a heat storm. She listened with her eyes half closed. That night, her fever climbed. Rosie shivered even when she was burning up. Her breathing came fast and shallow, like she was running in a dream. Jack wiped her face with a damp cloth, counting each breath, afraid to look away. "I don't like it down here," she murmured. "I want to see the sun." The words hit him harder than the cold ever had. Jack leaned his forehead against hers. "You will, I promise." But his promise felt thin in the heavy air. For 3 days, he barely slept. He rationed water to keep her lips wet. He sang off-key songs he barely remembered. When she drifted in and out of sleep, he whispered, "Stay with me, stay with me." In the quiet, fear grew loud. The burrow that had once felt safe now felt too small, too closed, too far from help. Jack thought about the pipe icing over again, about the way smoke filled the room, about how no one would know if Rosie stopped breathing. He hated himself for it, but a thought crept in. What if hiding was killing her? On the 4th morning, Rosie's fever broke. It happened slowly. Her skin cooled. Her breathing slowed. When she opened her eyes, they were clearer than they had been in days. "Jack," she said. He dropped to his knees beside the bed. "I'm here." "I dreamed we were outside," she whispered. There was grass. Jack laughed and cried at the same time. He held her so tight she squeaked. "Don't do that again," he said, his voice shaking. "Don't scare me like that." She gave a weak smile. "You look funny." But when she fell asleep again, Jack stayed awake, staring at the dirt wall. The truth settled into him like cold. They had survived the storm. They had survived the smoke, but they might not survive another sickness. The burrow had kept them hidden. Now it was trapping them. That night, Jack packed a small bag. 2 sweaters, the last of the bread, Rosie's rabbit, and the notebook with her crooked letters. He didn't tell her yet, but the decision was already made. Winter had not beaten them. Staying buried might. Jack waited for the wind to quiet. Not for it to stop, just to soften enough that their footprints wouldn't be obvious. Before dawn, he shook Rosie gently awake. "Hey," he whispered, "it's time." She blinked, confused. "Time for what?" "To go outside." For a second, she didn't move. Then her eyes widened. "Really?" Jack nodded. "We can't stay down here anymore." He helped her into her coat and wrapped the scarf twice around her neck. He handed her the stuffed rabbit and slung the small bag over his shoulder. When he opened the hatch, cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. Rosie squinted as pale light spilled down the ladder like something alive. They climbed slowly. Rosie went first, her boots slipping on the rungs. Jack stayed close behind, one hand on her heel, the other gripping the rope. When her head rose above the hatch, she gasped. "It's so big." Jack climbed out after her and stood there, breathing in air that didn't smell like smoke or dirt. The sky was a washed-out blue, and the snow had begun to sag and melt into gray slush. The house behind them looked smaller than he remembered, crooked, empty, and tired. Rosie took a step and wobbled. Her legs weren't used to open space anymore. Jack caught her. "Easy." She laughed, a sound he hadn't heard in weeks. "It feels funny." They didn't go back inside. They walked past the barn and the frozen pump and out to the road. Jack didn't know where they would sleep that night. He didn't know if someone would call the county or if they'd end up in separate places. But he knew one thing. They weren't hiding anymore. Halfway to town, Rosie looked up at him. "Are we still playing the hiding game?" Jack shook his head. "No, the game's over." "Did we win?" He thought about the burrow, the smoke, the fever, the long, dark days. Then he squeezed her hand. "Yeah, we did." They reached the edge of town just as the sun broke over the roofs. Smoke curled from chimneys. A dog barked somewhere. A truck rattled down the street. Life went on. Unaware of the winter, two kids had survived underground. Jack stopped and looked down at Rosie. Her cheeks were pale, but her eyes were bright. Alive. Here. Whatever happens, he said, we face it together. She nodded. Always. They stepped forward into the noise and light of the waking town, leaving behind a hole in the ground that had once been their whole world. Somewhere behind them, the burrow stayed silent. No sign of the fear, the hunger, or the courage it had held. And maybe that's how survival works. Not loud, not famous, just two small figures choosing to keep going. Now let me ask you, if you were Jack, would you have stayed hidden longer? Or would you have risked going back into the world sooner? What would you do to protect someone you love if you had no safe place left? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional survival stories about family, courage, and hope. New stories every week. Stay with us and keep believing that even in the darkest places, there's always a way back to the light.